Hello and welcome to Legally Speaking with me, Tarun Nagia. Today we do a very interesting discussion. And why do I say so? This is about the tiebreaker test for sort of ascertaining the residency of a person, and this is for tax purposes. And many times we see a lot of businessmen who are Indians, but many times they live abroad, and then there are taxation issues arising out of what is their primary residence. And in this case, we discussed the Binny Bansal case. As you all know, Binny Bansal has been the co-founder of a very popular shopping website called Flipkart, and that's the case that we're going to discuss today, that when he sort of sold his shares and shifted to Singapore, what happened. And stay tuned as we speak to our guest today, who is going to explain to us. So we go to the expert here. Good to see you, Advocate Aditya Ajgaonkar, and thank you for your time.
Hi Tarun, thanks for having me on the show today.
In fact, I remember doing 2 earlier shows with you on tax issues, and pretty interesting. And now I thought this time, let's do something even more interesting, which a lot of businessmen face. That many times most of these people, they're living in Singapore
Correct.
or UAE or many other countries, and they have active businesses in India or shareholdings in India, and they end up in the tax cases. And this time we discuss, as I said, the Binny Bansal case. So could you in about 2-3 minutes explain right from 2018, when Binny Bansal showed his shares in Flipkart, what all happened?
So, see, as per the order, but the facts that are coming are quite interesting. As you already know, Mr. Bansal was a co-founder of Flipkart. In around 2018, he resigned from being an employee of the company. And he shifted to Singapore. He shifted his employment to Singapore. He shifted to Singapore himself. I believe his family also seems to have shifted to Singapore along with him. And he was operating from Singapore. So for the purposes of the financial year 2019-20, that is from 1st April to 31st March 1920, he was, according to him, he claimed that he is a tax resident of Singapore and not of India, a non-resident in India for tax purposes. During this time, he sold off certain shares of Flipkart Singapore. And because these shares are of a foreign entity, and because he was a non-resident at that point of time, in fact, a tax resident of Singapore, the very place where the sale of shares happened, he said that these shares should not, the sale of these shares should not be liable for capital gains in India. The government of India took objection to that. According to them, he was a tax resident of India and the sale of shares should have been taxed in India. And a litigation ensued, and I'm quite sure that the litigation will possibly go to a higher level also. The order that we're discussing is of the Bangalore bench of the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. And it is very factual because the ITAT is the last fact-finding authority in the tax appeal hierarchy. From here, the question goes to High Court only with respect to a substantial question of law.
See, I want to know from here, and we make it simple for the business community to understand. Binny Bansal, when Walmart bought 77% stake in Flipkart, that's a controlling stake. That time he exited the company. But he had held some shares as a normal shareholder, like any shareholder. Then he took employment of a different company in Singapore, which means he now works for a different company, and Flipkart is his company in which he just has some shares.
Sure.
But he is a tax resident of Singapore because he works there, he has employment there. Then he sells his shares in Flipkart here. And whatever gain accrues, the Indian tax authority is saying pay us.
So, just to put things in perspective, he resigns from Flipkart
2018.
In 2019, he goes to Singapore and he takes up employment there. He sells shares of Flipkart Singapore, not India. Not here, there.
So he's selling Flipkart Singapore shares, not
shares.
Flipkart
no,
India.
No, the holding entity, which is in Singapore, they're not Flipkart India shares.
So how are we taxing that?
Yes. So the question out here, see, people keep talking about Tiger Global, which is also something to do with Flipkart only, the Supreme Court order. But when it comes here, the question actually revolved around whether Mr. Bansal was a tax resident of India or not for that year. Because if you are a tax resident of India for a year, then your global income is taxed in India. If you are a non-resident, then only your Indian income is taxed in India. And if you are something which is referred to as resident but not ordinary resident, then also your Indian income is taxed in India. So the question is, because this is a sale of shares in Singapore, of a Singapore company by a tax resident of Singapore, that is what was contended from the assessee's side. The government says no, he is a tax resident of India. And even if it is presumed that he is a tax resident of both the states, Singapore and India, then we come to something called the tiebreaker test that is prescribed in the double taxation avoidance agreement that is in place between Singapore and India. So, usually there is domestic tax law, and then there are treaties that various countries enter into amongst themselves to decide how to avoid double taxation. Now, taxation itself is a function of a sovereign. So, sovereign nations can, of course, enter into different treaties with different countries with different covenants based on their understanding to decide how to avoid a double effect of taxation. It shouldn't be very fair if a person sells, gets some income in India, and if he is a tax resident of, say, both India and US or India and Singapore, that he should be taxed doubly on the same amount. So usually the treaty provides for a mechanism to avoid this double taxation. Now the treaty has a tiebreaker test, that is, if an individual is a resident of both contracting states, then in cases of A, B, C, D, this is how you determine where his income will be taxable for that year. So for the purposes of India-Singapore DTAA, Article 4, which defines residence, has clause 2, which says where by reason of provisions of paragraph 1 an individual is resident of both contracting states, his status shall be determined as follows. And I'm going to read because it is fairly technical. He shall be deemed to be a resident of the state in which he has a permanent home available. This is very important to him. If he has a permanent home available to him in both states, he shall be deemed to be a resident of the state with which his personal and economic relations are closer. Into bracket, center of vital interest. Now, this is very subjective, and this is what is discussed, and this is what we will also discuss.
Because we will have house in, rich people will have house in both places. Well-to-do people will have permanent house in Singapore, permanent house in India. Then how do you deduce?
Correct. Because you don't go only on houses. You will also have to look at what is the center of vital interest, which takes us to clause B. It says, if the state in which he has a center of vital interest cannot be determined, or if he has not a permanent home available to him in either state, he shall be deemed to be a resident of the state in which he has an habitual abode.
Which is what?
In this case, or in general, see, these are all very subjective.
See, I'll tell you what is a habitual abode. If he's in Singapore,
yes,
and he is employed as a CEO in a company in Singapore, doesn't it automatically become a habitual abode?
It depends, because habitual abode comes into play only if he doesn't have permanent house in both the states.
So in this case, what happened
in this case, he was staying in Singapore on rented accommodation. But he had shifted with his full family. See, he was employed in Singapore. His wife was employed in Singapore. Believe his family, even his children were in Singapore for their education. So he had moved lock, stock and barrel. What had in fact happened was that in this year, he had spent a certain number of days in India, I believe around 141 days, close to 141 days, out of which certain days were during the COVID pandemic also. And in fact, in this ITAT order, even the fact that during certain days of COVID pandemic he was here seems to have factored into figuring out which is the center of vital interest and where his personal and economic relations. See, it is not only economic relations, it is personal and economic relations are closer. So they have gone into where his parents stay, what sort of properties he has in India, what sort of properties would you have anywhere else, and this would apply to every assessee. See, the wordings are extremely subjective, so you would have to satisfy the assessing officer. Let's move away from Mr. Bansal for a bit, because now I think the floor is open for a general discussion. Where do I stay? Where does my wife stay? Where am I employed? Where are my children studying, or where are they employed? How many days did I spend in India? How many days did I spend, say, in Singapore? Because the question out here is in Singapore. Where all did I travel? Where are my investments? what sort of salary I am drawing from this country, what sort of salary am I drawing from this country, where is my passive income, where did I go in order to ensure during say COVID, like because COVID was taken as an example, 30 days of COVID lockdown. If I'm in India, the ITAT seems to say that if you were in India during COVID, such a difficult time, you'll be closer to people whom you care for most, and you were in India.
But tell me one thing, and I would want to know this. COVID is an extraordinary circumstance.
Correct.
I know people who went to America and they had to stay there because COVID struck. The flights couldn't come to India.
Correct.
Airspace, I mean, of course, because of the spread of COVID, nobody was flying.
Yes.
And the governments were not permitting.
Correct.
That doesn't mean they become an American resident for tax purposes because, COVID is an extraordinary circumstance. Or somebody for that matter who's stuck in India and can't go to America because no flights are flying, then he doesn't become an Indian tax resident. Is that also taken in consideration by Indian tax authorities that people can get stuck during a pandemic? They can't go.
Yes, and there was a CBDT notification, in fact, that had come out. During the pandemic, if you were supposed to leave India before lockdown, but if you didn't end up with 31st March, those days would be excluded. But, it did not provide long-lasting relief because, there are, the CBDT circular, in fact, considered the fact that there was different countries were treating the pandemic differently. Some were giving extension, some were not. See, everyone wants to expand the tax base. At the end of the day, when your residential status for the purpose of taxation depends upon your stay in India, then stay becomes the most important thing. See, this entire thing would have been avoided had he not ended up staying in India for those many days. Because
Aditya, is there a day threshold? Like if
Yes.
I'm 180 days or 150 days in a year, I have to be in a sort of a country to be taxed by that country, be it India, be it Singapore.
see, every country has its own tax law. But in India, Section 6 of the Income Tax Act says an individual is said to be a resident in India in any previous year if A, he is in India in that year for a period or periods amounting in all to 182 days or more. So first is 182 days in that year, which was in this case not fulfilled, which is why I said was a non-resident. And C, having within 4 preceding years that year being in India for a period or periods amounting in all to 365 days or more is in India for a period of periods amounting in all to 60 days or more in that year. So then if you have 365 days over the 4 previous years, then you shouldn't be in India for more than 60 days in a year. But there is an explanation also, right, which says that if he is a citizen or a person of Indian origin, then if he is outside India and he comes to India on a visit to India, then 182 days will substitute the 60 days. Okay. It's a fairly technical, complex thing, and very honestly, you have to show when your passport was stamped in, out, etc. for the purpose of residential status. But it is because these days, these issues came up. The fact that he stayed 141 days in India due to COVID, due to n number of things. It was, I believe, claimed that it should have been considered as 182 days.
Because of COVID, he was stuck, basically. That's what you're
But
saying.
it is still below 182 days.
Okay.
His stay did not extend beyond 182 days. His stay was 141 days.
So tell me one thing, if India taxes him, at least in this case, then Singapore will not tax him.
So now there is, for that you have Article 13 of India-Singapore DTAA, right? So DTAAs are very interesting. What they seem to try to do is to avoid double taxation.
Agreed.
Now they work very simply. They either India or the other country will get to tax. If both the countries tax, Tarun, then the credit for tax paid in one country will usually be given in the other.
Okay.
So you don't end up getting doubly taxed. Another interesting thing is that there is different treatment for as shares that were acquired before April 1st, 2017. And these were from before 2017. So Article 13 of India-Singapore DTAA that is relevant for this case said that gains from alienation of shares acquired before 1st April 2017 in a company which is a resident of a contracting state shall be taxable only in the contracting state in which the alienator is a resident. That means only the state in which he was a resident had the right to tax the shares.
Tell me one thing now. In this case of Binny Bansal, what did the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal do? It sort of allowed him to pay tax in Singapore and not in India?
No. It says he is an Indian tax resident. He will have to pay tax in India.
So you think he appealed to the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal and it ruled against him?
Yes.
And what did it rule?
So, see, there were a number of factors in which there were a number of grounds that were raised before the ITAT also. And I'm sure those will go to the High Court also. A number of
Are
grounds
they noted
raised.
in the order, all the grounds?
They are.
All
The order is fairly long. It's 189 pages long.
In which all the basically pleas of...
Even written submissions of both the sides are recorded. And interestingly, for the revenue, the Additional Solicitor General of India has appeared in ITAT.
For this?
For this matter.
A matter of a few crores.
It's not a few crores, it's quite a few crores.
Okay, it's how much?
I'm sorry. So the point is, it's not just Flipkart.
Just because people
because it is not only Flipkart Singapore shares. He sold
so let's say it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Okay.
Also, it's...
So you mean the revenue side gets interested?
Revenue side gets interested.
Okay, I'll not push you on the figures. I just want to know one fact from you. So Binny Bansal didn't win the case and this clearly going to High Court now. I want to know this from you, and a lot of businessmen would want to know this. Why is this case important?
See, for me, this case underscores a sort of understanding in what would go to you proving factually the tiebreaker test. If you want
so it will lay down grounds of the tiebreaker test if this were to go to Supreme Court?
At some point of time, even forget, the Supreme Court for now, because this is at the ITAT level. ITAT goes into facts. Appeal from here to the High Court or Supreme Court goes into substantial questions of law. At that point of time, unless there is a perversity in facts, the High Court and the Supreme Court do not go into facts. The ITAT is the final fact-finding authority.
Do you see this going to Supreme Court here?
It probably could. That would depend upon the assessing.
Because I don't see somebody like Binny Bansal yielding or even the tax department yielding.
Because I believe that both the parties have a strong case. There is a question of interpretation at the end of the day.
But there is only one catch, Aditya, which you shared with us, that this was during COVID. And if anything happens during COVID, then this is an extraordinary event. Okay. A person could obviously take a plea to the Supreme Court saying that I was stuck to India, I had to go to Singapore, but there was no way I could fly out. Is this true?
See, Tarun, now the difficulty happens is that you cannot look at COVID in isolation for this judgment.
Why is that so?
That is because there are other factors also. So, because the judgment is so big, right? Of course, if you remove the COVID part, then the assessee's case becomes even stronger, right? Because I may not have wanted to stay for those extra days during COVID. I might have made plans to go out, but because of COVID, I was stuck. But there are other questions that have been considered for the tiebreaker test, and they are very interesting, and I want to point them out to you.
Yeah, 1 or 2 years.
Yes. It is very interesting because the ITAT has actually considered what are his investment and assets in India and what are his investments and assets outside India. Passive source of income also.
Can I hold you to it here? I made a lot of money in India, for example. But then in 2020, I decided to move to Singapore. Which means now I am earning money in Singapore. Suppose I used to make 1 crore rupees in India, now I make 30 lakhs in Singapore. But I took that decision in 2020 that I am going to Singapore. Which means that now I start a new life in Singapore.
Correct.
What I earned in India was my past life. Why would the tax department tax me on my past life earned income? See, because obviously, if I've lived in India all these years, my accumulated assets and income in India will be more. But now I've moved to Singapore.
100%. But tax is fairly technical, and so is the treaty, right? Now, again, for the purpose of the treaty, let us remember that this case is very factual. Mr. Bansal did not own a house in Singapore. He was renting.
Achha, I want to know this for the businessman's perspective.
Yes.
Given how expensive property is and given how globally people are renting more than buying assets.
Right.
Renting has become a lifestyle. And people pay obscene amounts of money as rent to live in good houses. Do you think this argument in today's time in 2026 may not hold that much of ground?
See, I have been through the order. Okay, I have facts that are there in the order. Now, there were various contentions that were put forward also, saying that the house, firstly, that my house in Bangalore, etc., that I was looking, it was land, it was not complete. That very honestly, my permanent home is in Singapore, because it doesn't say, see, I mean, look at it this way. There is a difference between permanent house and permanent home, no? If I have to interpret as a lawyer, wouldn't there be a difference between a house and a home? If I'm staying with my family, if my kids are learning there, if my wife is employed there, if I am employed there, would that be my home? Or would, I mean...
You speaking beautifully, tell me one thing.
It matters.
See, I'll tell you why. Let's take inter-country migration. Say a family from Bihar, Jharkhand or Uttar Pradesh lives in Ahmedabad. They have a large house in UP and Bihar, big house, farm. For 30 years they have not lived there. They live in a rented accommodation in Ahmedabad. Isn't Ahmedabad the a place where they are residing for tax purposes?
See, I'll tell you, tax is very funny. The reason why I'm telling you is because there's a section, okay, in income tax 54 and 54S. Yes. Capital gains get exemption if you purchase a residential house. This is how the language of the statute was. One person actually argued that it says a residential house, not one residential house. He bought 2 adjoining flats.
Okay.
Joined them together.
Yes.
And the order came in his favor.
Okay. So this is technical, yeah?
It is technical. It is always technical.
I want to ask you something, that if I have a house worth 5 crore in Mumbai and I pay a rent of 30 lakhs a month in Singapore.
Yeah.
In 1 year, I have paid almost the cost of my house in Mumbai.
Correct.
Because maybe I am earning, I want to rent now. There is evidence that my kids go to school in Singapore. There is evidence my wife works in Singapore. Don't I naturally become a sort of, for tax purposes, a resident of Singapore? Or because I have that house in Mumbai of 5 crore, I'm still a resident for India for tax purposes?
No, so now that's what I'm saying. The interesting part about this is that it presupposes that you are a resident of both contracting states for tax purposes. The tiebreaker test only kicks in if you are a tax resident of both the countries. Then the tiebreaker test will determine who can tax you and how much.
Point well taken.
So it doesn't...
So tiebreaker is discretion?
Yes. A tiebreaker is subjective.
Subjective.
Because the words are so wide, like there is the word used is home instead of house. I think it is important. You may believe it's me waxing eloquently, which I hope is like a good thing, right, as a lawyer. But it does make a difference, right? Why is the word house not used? Why is it home? Now, what exactly is the meaning of personal and economic relations? Because in this case, it was actually argued, it is on record, that he was living independently of his parents, that his parents were living independently in another state in India, not in Bangalore where he was. I mean, the amount of information that had to be put out to satisfy the tiebreaker test, the amount of details in which they've gone into.
And still Binny has not won this case as of now.
No, he has not.
Achha, that brings me to my last question. This is going to High Court clearly now that he's lost, because even he's not going to give up.
According to me, it should, yes.
Yes. So, is this something to watch out for all of us who watch the tax very closely and the larger business community?
I think with respect to the tiebreaker test, this will lay down a very, very important footprint.
And you mean High Court, being a constitutional court, can lay down law in this case?
The High Court in this case will have a statutory appeal that lies to it.
Yes.
Right. So the statutory appeal will be on a substantial question of law. So it will lay down the law.
Interesting. You've introduced us today, Aditya, to a very interesting issue of residency and for tax purposes through a very interesting person, that is Binny Bansal. And of course, he's famous because of Flipkart fame. And of course, a lot of other businessmen's cases will be impacted due to this judgment. Because if we see the outflow of businessmen out of India in the past 4-5 years, it's about 8-9 lakhs every year. if 9 lakh businessmen are going out, these are not the one who are going out for jobs in Gulf and Singapore, but businessmen who are migrating, much like Binny Bansal, I think there could be a lot of tax cases because all these businessmen who are leaving India have not shut everything in India. They
Right.
still continue to operate businesses, big or small.
Right.
They're just living abroad.
Right.
They would have started something there. They all will have tax disputes.
Correct.
So I think we have a lot of tax disputes in the upcoming 3, 4, 5 years. It was interesting to talk to you as always. And I think I hope to follow up on this issue with you maybe in the next 2, 3 months because I think we'll generate a lot of interest on this topic.
I'm sure.
Thank you for your time and appreciate that you could join us.
Thank you so much, Tarun.
So-
This has been fascinating as always.
Thank you. So here was Advocate Aditya Asgaonkar who practices on the tax side extensively and he shared with us the Binny Bansal case where the tiebreaker test has been sort of used to determine in which country he will be taxed for tax purposes. It was very interesting because there is an exception in this case that when Binny Bansal was in India, the lockdown happened and COVID and he says, and as we all presume, he got stuck in India. And because Binny Bansal got stuck in India, there is that kind of an extraordinary situation which now the tax department has to go into and then find out. Of course, he locks the case in the income tax appellate tribunal. Of course, given the amounts are large, he will contest it in High Court and that's where we'll continue to track this case because this case is important to a lot of businessmen and we had Advocate Aditya Asgaonkar to chat on this with us. Thank you us for joining in and look forward to see you in future on this topic which we'll take up soon. Thank you very much.